morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever and whenever you are watching this. I welcome you to the 36th episode of this IHRM webinar series. Today, Jan Selmer, Margaret Schaefer, Stefan Joos, and Sebastian Reiche will share with us a summary of their HRMR, or Human Resources Management Review article on long-term expatriates. Jan is a professor at Aarhus University and the founding editor-in-chief of the Journal of Global Mobility. Margaret is a chair professor at the University of Oklahoma in the United States of America, Stefan at the University of Queensland in Australia, and Sebastian at IESE Business School in Barcelona, España. By the way, my name is Miguel Olivas Luján, and I am a professor of management at the School of Business at Pennsylvania Western University's College of Science, Technology, and Business. I have a few announcements before I pass the virtual podium to Jan. First, I want to highlight that this IHRM webinar series began in 2020 when the pandemic forced us all to stay home and suspended conferences and many other scholarly activities. My colleagues, Mila Lazarova from Simon Fraser University in Canada, Elaine Farndale from Penn State in the United States, Marion Festing from ESP Berlin, and Maral Muradbekova from ESP Paris, and Maja Vidovic from RIT Croatia, and I started this webinar series inviting colleagues whose recent publications or conference presentations are influencing our field. We have been taking turns at different roles in the process of co-organizing this series, but special credit for our most recent webinars is due to Penn State in the United States. Elaine Farndale and Cara Adrian have been so helpful, and without their resourceful center and support, this series would have been much more difficult to organize. The last very practical announcement is that we will be using the webinar's Q&A window to send questions, comments, suggestions, or reactions to Jan, Margaret, Stefan, and Sebastian. Please use it at any time during our presentation. I have to apologize in advance because we rarely have time to answer all the questions or address all the comments at the end. Once the presentations are over, we will do our best to address as many of them as we can within the time frame that we have reserved for this webinar. I will now turn the virtual podium over to Jan Selmer, who will get us started in today's webinar. Jan, once again, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. We have been looking forward to this webinar for weeks already, so please take it away.
Thank you very much. I will start with this, and the whole thing started with my idea that, which I always do, I look to myself for many research ideas, and I've been an academic long-term expatriate for more than 2 decades now, and I wondered why there was no research about me and my colleagues. And that's how I started this research on long-term expatriates. So I invited a few of my colleagues, and we come up with this article in Human Resource Management Review. Oops. First, I want to tell you a little bit about who are the long-term expatriates. Well, we call it business expatriates who extend their employment outside of their home country beyond 10 years. Why 10 years? Well, of course, it's a bit arbitrary, but there are some reasons why it should not be 20 years. It should not be much less than 10 years, because we're talking about long-term expatriates. So a normal average of expatriates are about 3 years, and 3 to 5 years, and it means that after 10 years, there are virtually very few who repatriate to their home country, which means that they remain outside their home country, in host country, or in one of their host countries, depending on what kind of expatriate we're talking about. And also, some recent research has said that you need at least 2 assignments to make it worth to stay outside, to stay abroad. So who are they? Well, if you talk about business expatriates, then you can talk about assigned and self-initiated expatriates. And you have 2 kinds of assigned. One who move around, take one job here and another there, and a next one, and the next one maybe. For example, if you're an executive in a big multinational, then you can take different host country manager positions, or you can stay in the same place. For example, if you get some kind of special personal ties to that country, you marry locally, or you get you get a local partner who is not interested in moving back to your home country, so you stay there. And then you have self-initiated long-term expatriates. You have those who move around from country to country. For example, digital nomads can do that, and they usually go for countries they like in itself, and they bring the job virtually with them. And then you have persons who goes native, so-called, and they stay in one place. They are originally self-initiated, but they like the place, and they can get repeated work permits, or they become permanent residents. Well, that's what I wanted to say initially about long-term expatriates. So over to you, Sebastian.
Thank you very much, Jan. Let me try the slides. So Jan talked about the phenomenon of these different ways of how you could be expanding your international experience, not just from one expatriate assignment that typically is 3 to 5 years, but we're looking at a longer time frame. I wanted to kind of dig a bit deeper into the theory that has guided our conceptualizations to kind of anchor some of these phenomena that both Jan and actually Margaret as well have lived in their own professional careers. So we take an embeddedness theory lens to these long-term expatriates. And what's embeddedness? Embeddedness essentially is a general form of attachment that captures many different forces that kind of enmesh employees on the social web. And this construct originally was developed, as many of you will know, in the turnover literature to describe employee retention. So it has very much an organizational focus. But then researchers also acknowledge that you're not only embedded within an organizational network at work, but you can also be embedded in a non-work context. And in fact, the original construct of embeddedness has really differentiated between these two domains. You can be attached to an organization, different aspects of the work-life domain, which is often also called on-the-job embeddedness, and you can be embedded to a community, which is the non-work context, more the personal life domain. Community is not just your neighborhood. Again, this is really a geographic area that kind of captures institutional context, different schools, various social support systems. So that's captured in these two domains. Now, what we argue in our paper, and that we believe is novel to our theorizing as well, is that in addition to these two domains that are really kind of focused more on location, there's a third domain that individuals can be embedded to as well, which is to a way of life, a lifestyle. And lifestyle really kind of captures different set of practices that guide how individuals lead their lives, how they relate with others. You can think of, there's a bohemian lifestyle, there's a minimalist lifestyle, there's a healthy lifestyle. And we argue that in our context, on the context of expatriates, you can become embedded to an expatriate lifestyle as well, which captures aspects that typically are relevant, motivating for expats. Many of us, I'm looking at the list of attendees here as well, many of you, you're experiencing, you're living in an expat lifestyle as well, which is adventure, diversity, uncertainty as well, which can be very kind of motivating too, and focus on personal and professional growth. So what's important is that with this expat lifestyle, this is transferable across environments. So think about this cosmopolitan vibe of embassy parties in many different global cities. You have that in many contexts. So that kind of gives continuity across environments. And what we argue too is that this embeddedness to an expat lifestyle is conceptually different from being embedded to a work life and a personal life domain. One, because it can cut across these two domains. Right? You can follow an expat lifestyle both at work and non-work. And it's also kind of moves beyond the location of the host or the home country. You can follow an expat lifestyle at the host country when you're abroad, but you could also follow an expat lifestyle when you're in your home country. So these are these three levels of embeddedness, with our particular focus on embeddedness to an expat lifestyle, a novel idea that we conceptually develop further. Now, very briefly, you'll know if you know embeddedness literature, there's three causal components to embeddedness that we follow as well in our work. So there's links, which are formal and informal connections with other individuals, institutions. So think for expatriates, it could be friends, family members, acquaintances, colleagues of the expat. And that can exist within the organization, the host country community, and the expat lifestyle, if you will. Then there's fit, which is really the compatibility of the expat. So to the extent that the person, the expat, and the identity, values, and goals align with the organization, the community, and the expatriate lifestyle. And then there's also sacrifices, which are really kind of perceived losses, which can be both tangible and more emotional, psychological, if you will, that you might incur by leaving the organization, the community, or abandoning a lifestyle. So you could give up career opportunities, you could give up familiar routines, you could give up a sense of belonging. And so there's more recent work that has looked at how different antecedents in organizations or communities influence embeddedness, and then how different combinations of links, fit, and sacrifice will link or shape different outcomes. Margaret will talk about the outcomes in a moment. Before we'll go to the outcomes, I kind of wanted to focus a bit more on making sense of these four different types that Jan already talked about. But essentially, that we're following this literature stream on embeddedness, and we're arguing that there's a specific mix of embeddedness dimensions across the organization, the community, and the expat lifestyle, and that this mix leads to different interpersonal and interpersonal consequences. Okay, so again, before we get to the outcomes, let me circle back to Jan's earlier comments about the four types. And I just want to pause here for a moment. We take a lens of typological theorizing, which is slightly different from the typical box and arrow theorizing. Typological theorizing is essentially a way of categorizing, making sense of different ideal types. And so the idea here is that there's different combinations of attributes, which in our case are these 3 levels of embeddedness. Right? You have a different level of embeddedness to the organization, to the community, and the expat lifestyle. And that this particular configuration or mix then translates into different effects. And what makes it interesting, what we thought helped our theorizing here, is that you could actually model different or multiple pathways. So it's not just one relationship between an antecedent and an outcome that matters, but depending on which type you are, and the closer you are to a particular ideal type, that might relate to similar outcomes. So empirically, for example, you could look at how an individual who is a long-term expatriate resembles one particular ideal type, and then how this predicts consequences. So let me walk you through our typology, these 4 types, informed by our embeddedness lens. In addition to the paper that we published, we've tried kind of catchier terms. So I'll give them to you as well to make this a bit easier to remember for you. And I'll start at the top left corner to explain and run you through the typology. So these self-initiated international LTEs, again, they initially move on their own volition. They're characterized by a low organizational embeddedness, a high community embeddedness, and a low lifestyle embeddedness. So as Jan mentioned, this could be someone who falls in love with a foreign country, goes native. After a long time, they probably resemble skilled migrants as well. And so this is someone who may not stay loyal to an organization, who might move between companies, but stay in the local host country community. And it's also someone who abandons the expat lifestyle, who really settles. So we call them planted pioneers, because they really kind of then settle down in the host community. Then you have self-initiated global long-term expatriates, who are characterized by low levels of organizational embeddedness, low levels of community embeddedness, and high lifestyle embeddedness. So these are people who keep moving between countries, often building careers across borders, and they really embrace a mobile lifestyle. So think about global digital nomads. They have little loyalty to a local community or specific organization. So that we call them free floaters, because they keep moving, very, very, very mobile. Then if you move to the top right, you have the assigned international long-term expatriates, which we call station settlers. They're characterized by high levels of organizational embeddedness. So they stick with the organization, high community embeddedness, and low lifestyle embeddedness. So this type usually starts out with being assigned by the company to a foreign country, and they then decide to stay for a variety of personal, professional reasons. They often move to a local plus contract, which is more beneficial than changing to a local organization completely, but they stay loyal to the local host community and then settle down there. So they're station settlers. And then the 4th type, assigned global long-term expatriates. They have typical global executives who move from one foreign country to the other. But originally transferred by a multinational, they provide strategic continuity across subsidiaries. Think about people who take consecutive country manager positions across different foreign units. So very globally mobile lifestyle, if you will, but very loyal to the organization. They stay with the organization, so high organization embeddedness. If you wanted to take this typology and compare this to repatriates, a typical repatriate you'd find at the bottom right front corner, but having high organization embeddedness, a person who wants to repatriate with the same company back home, but low expat lifestyle embeddedness, so they want to come home, and low community embeddedness, they'd rather go home. So the topology kind of helps us also to differentiate long-term expatriation from the typical repats that you find by deciding to move back home earlier. So in a nutshell, our typology essentially kind of captures how people extend their international experience through different combinations of valuing these 3 levels or dimensions of embeddedness, and that leads to different types and different ways of how you can conceive a global career. With this, let me stop here and hand over to Margaret.
Okay, thank you, Sebastian. See if I can. Kara, the next slide, please. As Sebastian explained, embeddedness theory not only helps us understand how and why expatriates choose to extend their expatriate experience, it also helps us to theorize about the interpersonal and interpersonal consequences of being an international or global long-term expatriate. Just as organizational behavior scholars have linked embeddedness with various cognitive, affective, and behavioral outcomes, expatriate scholars have also found support for the influence of embeddedness on various outcomes that are relevant to expatriates. Building on this stream of research, we have differentiated a variety of both intrapersonal and interpersonal consequences across the 4 types of LTEs. So I will just briefly describe some of the main takeaways from each of these different aspects of interpersonal and interpersonal consequences that are depicted on the slide. With respect to the intrapersonal consequences, we highlight 4 that are especially relevant to expatriates. Adjustment, as everyone knows, is a main concern of expatriation. Work performance, as well as career advancement and repatriation also. With respect to adjustment, although research indicates that adjustment and embeddedness are related yet distinct constructs, we contend that the relationship between the two may be more nuanced when we take both temporal and location conditions into consideration. We anticipate that difficulties in adjustment will be greater for global LTEs who frequently move from one country to another and who are higher on expatriate lifestyle embeddedness. They will have more challenges than international LTEs who remain in the same country for an extended period of time and are higher on community embeddedness. Although there may be some carryover in adjustment skills from one host location to another, global LTEs may still find it more challenging to adjust because the global LTEs still need to go through a learning curve for every new host country that they relocate to. With respect to work performance, in line with extant research on this area, we consider both task and contextual or relational performance outcomes. In general, assigned LTEs tend to have greater levels of both forms of performance than SIEs because they have stronger work and career motives and they have more organizational knowledge and knowing whom capital. That is, the assigned LTEs have greater organizational embeddedness. Over time, we expect, though, that both forms of work performance will differ between global and international LTEs. For example, assigned global LTEs who remain with the same employer, their performance will increase. For self-initiated global LTEs, task performance may at least initially deteriorate because these moves typically involve a change of both location and employer, resulting in lower levels of organizational and community embeddedness. With respect to career advancement, research on this topic has been restricted to assigned expatriates only, and conflicting findings have been found with respect to the influence of international assignment experience on career advancement. While some find a positive relationship, others have reported a negative relationship. However, we believe that long-term expatriate types may have implications for expatriate career advancement. Assigned global LTEs may enjoy greater career advancement than their self-initiated counterparts because they're more likely to remain with the same employer, which leads to greater organizational embeddedness. However, assigned global LTEs may suffer from being out of sight and out of mind, especially when organizations make promotion decisions. So there are some risks associated with being a long-term expatriate. For SIE global long-term expatriates who are less embedded in the organization, there's limited interorganizational transferability of relevant experience, so their opportunities for advancement are limited. Even for international LTEs, assigned LTEs may have more career advancement opportunities because of their contacts with people back at headquarters and their possible regional experiences. With respect to repatriation, assigned expatriates will usually return home while still employed with the same company that sponsored their move, so they're more likely to enjoy a smoother repatriation experience than SIEs in particular, who have to find a new job in the home country. Both assigned and self-initiated expatriates who are high on lifestyle embeddedness, however, will be less likely to repatriate. They're more likely to continue moving to other locations. Regarding the interpersonal consequences, next slide, we consider the connections and relationships that expatriates have with relevant others, such as their professional network connections, their connections with accompanying family members, as well as family members that are left behind at home, and also relationships with HCNs, both at work and outside of work. In terms of their international professional networks, we anticipate that major differences will occur between assigned and self-initiated expatriates. While assigned expatriates may naturally expand their international networks by becoming embedded in their larger organization and the various subsidiaries that they have, SIEs may feel less attached to the organizations that employ them and see their international networks primarily as a means to strategically facilitate another transfer. Assigned global LTEs will likely forge stronger connections that may also benefit headquarters. Self-initiated global LTEs may focus on connections that will benefit their own interests. For international LTEs, both assigned and self-initiated, we expect their social ties in the host location will grow stronger over time. As far as connections with accompanying family members go, both types of global LTEs may face similar issues. Multiple moves will require both expatriates and their families to adjust to their family roles and routines. While shared relocation experiences may strengthen their relationships, multiple moves may actually have a destabilizing effect on families. For international LTEs, both types should, over time, forge stronger connections as the family settles into the host community. For connections with family members at home, we think that global LTEs, because of recent technological advances, will find it easier to maintain connections with family at home. Also, the assigned global LTEs often have paid visits, and that will further strengthen those connections and relationships with family back home, especially relative to SIEs who have to be self-funded for their return visits. As both types of international LTEs become more and more embedded in the host country, their attachment to the home country may weaken, threatening any relationships that they may have with family members back home. For relationships with HCNs at work and outside of work, we anticipate that global LTEs will likely differ from their international counterparts. For global LTEs, because they're moving so frequently, host country nationals will tend to perceive them as temporary and will consider them as outsiders, resulting in relatively weak organizational and community ties. For international LTEs who are embedded in their community, ties with HCNs may strengthen over time. And all four of us who are working on this project observed this effect also, that we found that as we stayed longer in our host country, it was easier for us to develop relationships with those host country nationals. In concluding this, our comments or our thoughts about consequences, by unpacking these interpersonal and interpersonal consequences of being LTEs, we believe that we move global mobility research beyond the predominant focus on single and temporary types of international assignments to consider a more nuanced understanding of how location and time influence the outcomes of being an expatriate. And based on our theorization about this, we do want to encourage others to continue researching this so that we can better understand these influences. So next, Stefan will consider implications for future research on this phenomenon. Stefan, over to you.
Yes, thank you. So as the final speaker, I have the privilege of not looking back, but looking ahead, right? So rather than summarizing our findings, I will want to focus entirely on where we might want to go from here. And as this is a conceptual paper, where we obviously call for empirical research, as Margaret said, but we do have a number of clusters of research questions, 4 in specific, plus additional thoughts as well. So I would like to talk through those 4 ideas that we have. We have talked through the topology, the concept of embeddedness, and the different categories of LTEs. But what we have realized as part of our discussion is that there are many unanswered questions, and they lead into our research opportunities. So the first one is really that idea of why do some expatriates choose to stay abroad even after the assignment ends? And we know some become deeply embedded in their host countries, but what does that actually look like over time? What shifts in their identity, in their sense of belonging, in their comparison of home versus here lead to that decision? And there's a growing need to understand when and why expatriates perceive their embeddedness abroad greater than at home. How are they assessing that? Is it about the work, the lifestyle, or the relationship element, or perhaps all 3? One promising direction is to explore proactive behavior. If someone senses their host country ties are stronger than those at home, how might that shape their strategies to prolong their stay? Perhaps we are seeing some sort of expatriate agency in extending assignments or localizing their employment terms. Another big set of questions concerns how expatriates structure their extended careers. So if they have made that decision, how do they make sense of their journey once it goes off the traditional repatriation track? What kind of internal narratives are they developing, perhaps about their career success, their identity, or their belonging? And does that support their expatriate experience? A related line of inquiry is about organizational embeddedness, so one of the 3 key dimensions that we have identified. For example, we could ask, does a strong sense of fit or loyalty to one company keep someone anchored in one location longer? Or if embeddedness starts to decline, what drives the decision to change employers or even countries yet again? In other words, how does changing embeddedness in the organization, in the community, or lifestyle across those 3 dimensions translates into actual career mobility or perhaps stagnation? This also raises practical questions for organizations. How do they retain LTEs without necessarily offering new assignments or promotions, right? So if they are out of that expatriate cycle of expat in, expat out, what does that do to their retention strategies? Next slide, please. So another key focus area is intrapersonal consequences. So what are the consequences for the long-term expatriate? We still know very little about how being an LTE shapes identity, well-being, or psychological resilience over time. What happens when you become deeply attached to a globally mobile lifestyle? Or when you've lived abroad so long that neither home nor host countries actually feel like your identity or yours? We also have to make a clear distinction between international and global LTEs, as pointed out by my colleagues. How does adjustment differ across those 2 paths? For instance, we might find that global LTEs face more frequent ramp-up costs. But we also might find that they are better equipped to actually adapt much quicker than international ones. We can also ask how location-specific performance is affected by repeat relocation. Could we find that global LTEs outperform on transferable tasks, but they might actually struggle to integrate locally? And what does that mean for organizations in terms of allocating them into particular regions or countries? We also have to talk about careers and the idea of global careers. So how do advancement pathways differ for international versus global LTEs? Perhaps there are systemic constraints on progression when someone is embedded locally and doesn't really rotate. Maybe even a class ceiling in a host country if you're no longer seen as an expat, but also not yet a local. So this is an interesting dynamic that we think is a useful idea for future research. Again, we might think about in what situations the pull to repatriate might be weakened. Perhaps it's identity, family ties, organizational support, or perhaps a mix of those, right? But we need research to tease out those factors in much more detail and across life stages and over time. Finally, next slide. In terms of interpersonal consequences, we should also look at the professional networks that Margaret has mentioned. Do they look different for international versus global LTs? We believe they do. But does one group gain stronger local ties with the other, while the other builds maybe perhaps broader connections? So again, there's probably trade-offs of being more mobile or being more embedded in a particular location. And how does that play out in organizations? And how do they value social capital and different types of social capital? Family relationships remain, of course, a complex situation. How do LTEs maintain closeness with family in the home country, especially over many, many years? We know that communication technology helps, but perhaps this has actually more masked the difficulty of emotional distance rather than actually equalized it. And what are the relationships with host country nationals? It is an area, again, where we need more research on host country nationals and the dynamics that they have, particularly with long-term expatriates. Beyond that, there's a couple of other things that we would like to highlight and that we do mention in the paper. So the idea of methods, what kind of research design do we need for this type of research on long-term expatriations? And we think that the real value is in longitudinal studies to really trace how embeddedness evolves over time, over and across someone's career and life decisions, and how that unfolds. Many of the questions that we have discussed, like shifting repatriation intentions, changes in lifestyle, they can really only be captured through data collected across multiple time points. So we're calling for longitudinal studies. At the same time, we're seeing value in qualitative research and rich interview data, where we perhaps unpack those narratives, the changes around identities, and how long-term expatriates make sense of whether they should stay or move somewhere else or repatriate. Finally, we also think that there's, again, those 4 types of categories, and there's particular individuals, perhaps, and particular samples that might be of interest. So if you consider our assigned global LTEs, again, this is particularly relevant for global leadership roles, when we need to look at how this plays out in terms of career resilience, repeated adaptation, and professional networks as individuals move up towards executive roles in large multinational organizations. We can also look at older LTEs who really have done this for several decades and who are perhaps in the mid or late career stage. And that then brings up questions around aging, around retirement, and about long-term integration into non-native systems. So again, this is quite a specific type of dynamic then. And while we talked a lot about long-term expatriates, again, there's multiple implications for organizations as well. And particularly looking at this global mobility element of it, there are clear implications for global talent management. So we think that traditional expatriation and repatriation models don't really consider long-term expatriations, and organizations should rethink how they identify, support, and retain globally mobile talent, such as long-term expatriations. So there are implications for redefining talent pipelines. For example, when we look at succession planning, usually that means that there's fixed-term international assignments, and they are planned in for particular roles, perhaps somewhere else. So how does that dynamic play out when we have long-term expatriates who might decide to stay indefinitely? We look at embeddedness. Again, we think that organizations can be very strategic around supporting embeddedness rather than viewing embeddedness as a retention or byproduct. And finally, we want to make a case for valuing diverse expatriate identities. So the idea of self-initiated LTEs is not something that really fits into that corporate world and corporate mobility idea, but perhaps they bring in very valuable cross-cultural competencies and local insights. So we think that they should be recognized and rewarded within the system. And in short, or in summary, I think this means that our way of thinking has evolved, how we manage assignments, and we're moving towards nurturing global careers altogether. And we advocate for long-term expatriates ultimately to be part of that global mobility suite, and to let go of very rigid global mobility frameworks that think about talent or employees in a particularly very constrained, narrow way, excluding long-term expatriates. Thank you, and over to Miguel.
Thank you so much, Stefan. And thank you, Margaret, Sebastian, and Jan. This has been a very thoughtful, very thought-provoking, exciting presentation that brings up all sorts of questions, obviously. In fact, the first question I would like any of you to address is regarding, well, actually, Stefan has already addressed a little bit about what types of research could we engage in to address some of the questions that you brought up. But to the extent that you could tell us a little bit more about how we might be able to get access to these different types of expatriates, what comes to mind in terms of finding access to these samples, which are often very difficult to find and very again, depending on so many factors. Is there something that comes to mind as a natural way to start us onto the empirical side of testing these propositions, these ideas?
I'm happy to start, and then others please join me. I would say, we were looking around ourselves first, and we realized that all of us are actually in that situation. We have moved countries, we extended. So I think the starting point is for us as academics to look around ourselves. There are more than we think that are similar in that situation. So our personal networks. And we also discussed the idea of using social media and looking at career paths of particularly where again over multiple decades, and we can track the careers and see countries and places and positions. We can't capture the lifestyle element, I guess, through that CV screening, but we can certainly see the organization, embeddedness, and the location as well.
Thank you, Stefan. Any other takers? I guess Sebastian just opened the microphone. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, just to iterate, I think looking back in research, there was a bias of looking at the shorter-term expats because that's the type of data you more easily get access to. And I think if you think about where we're coming from, there was much more cross-sectional data being published in the past. So that was maybe enough to kind of look at that phenomenon. Having spoken, not just the four of us, but having then spoken about the concept to many other people, you see this popping up everywhere. So there's many of those long-term experts. So I think just snowballing techniques and actually looking more specifically at where these individuals sit in organizations, maybe even not consciously managed by organizations, but I believe that it's many that we could tap into.
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Go ahead, Margaret. You seem to have something to share too.
Well, yes. We do realize the challenges of collecting data. And I think especially for a large quantitative study to get enough responses that we could compare across the four types would be very challenging. But a good place to start, I think, would be with a qualitative study where we could get a much richer understanding of how these people make these decisions and what they actually experience, whether they move from location to location or they stay rooted or planted where they are.
Absolutely. Great, great. I have another question that is coming through the Q&A window, which, by the way, I invite everyone in our audience to use it. That's what it's for. As usual, at the end of the webinars, we tend to get a larger number of questions than we can actually address. But this question looks interesting in the sense of clarification. And by the way, please, everyone is invited to use the link that within the webinar chat has been posted to access the full article because it is open access, so we don't have to pay any extra money to see the full article, and obviously, use it, cite it, get inspired, and so on. But one question that is coming up here is regarding the difference between the assigned expatriate and the self-initiated expatriate. The question is, have you considered this type of experience, the fact that a person could be both assigned and self-initiated, or are we by definition making a mutually exclusive categorization? Are they mutually exclusive? Go ahead, Jan, please go ahead. Oh, you're muted. Yeah, the typical thing with these.
It's better if you hear my voice.
Right.
So I think this is just a sort of reference frame. If I just go to myself, I was both kind of self-initiated expatriate myself, and I was not a business expatriate either. I was an academic. So
Sure.
I was moving from several countries, and then I was staying for a long time in one place. So I'm also a mix. So I think we have to realize that the reality is much more complicated than a reference model, and this is what this is. And we have to. I agree that if to go forward with this, so far it's theory. We need empirical evidence that our theory can be supported or not. So we need something more than this. At least that's what I think. And I like the idea that we look at individual cases first, and then we can find out what kind of what we are theorizing makes sense and what doesn't.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. In fact, along these lines, another question that I'm reading in the chat and the Q&A is regarding the interest in skilled migrants, and obviously the skill level or the skill appropriateness for the experience comes up quite often. So the question is if you could comment on the differences and similarities between skilled migrants and the long-term expatriates. I mean, are there some areas of overlap that you can foresee inspiring more useful research for the expatriates themselves, for the organizations and or other stakeholders? So, go ahead.
Yeah, so maybe I saw there was another question about whether there would be any local hires, right? So the self-initiated LTEs, international LTEs that we conceptualize, that would be a particular case of someone who initially moves out and then ultimately changes employment in the local host country community and might move and might be hired locally. I guess the way we conceive this is that the initial motivation of the initial move out is defined whether it's a corporate assigned or self-initiated assignment, and then things may change later. So if you ask someone, do you perceive yourself as a skilled migrant or a self-initiated assignee? We were just at URAM conference last year and we were discussing, do people actually perceive themselves as self-initiated expats? I don't think any professional would use that term for themselves. They don't even know that we as academics use that term. We use it to categorize, right? But I guess, so the initial path is different. You're either assigned by a company or you go on your own volition, and then things happen to you. If you've been assigned by a company, and there is weighing up to have a local plus contract versus a completely local contract, you might stick with a local plus contract because it comes with more benefits. So there's path dependency of your choice. And I think that would be really interesting to look at from a research perspective, how that path, how your past decisions, initial decisions, which might have even been out of your control if you've been assigned by the company, how they affect future career decisions.
Absolutely.
I agree it's tricky to do that empirically, but I think this is really, really interesting to look at.
Yeah, because definitely this is dynamic. This is especially when we consider the long-term horizon, the 10 years that Jan was telling us, and the reasons for that. It's, one might start the experience with a certain frame of mind, but as time evolves and life changes, we also change those motivations and preferences, let alone the consequences. So fascinating. That's very, very neat. Another question that came up is regarding the usefulness of this typology to perhaps even infer consequences of long-term expatriation for the trailing spouses. As you know, there's a little bit of literature, not much, on what are the consequences and the motivations for sometimes the better half. I myself have, now been 20 years away from my native country, and I can see, sometimes looking at the effect that this has had on my wife, to what extent a trailing spouse is can be seen as a self-initiated expatriate, because they themselves, when they choose to follow us, they are making a sometimes not very conscious, sometimes very, very intentional decision to follow. So maybe there's a little bit of a stream to be explored, in terms of what are the reasons, the motivations, and obviously the eventual consequences for the spouses. I can see a couple of you opening microphones, so please go ahead, Margaret, and Jan, go ahead.
Thank you, Miguel, and thank you, whoever asked that question. I think it's a great question, and there are certainly implications for the trailing spouses. I think it'd be very interesting to look at that, because so many of the spouses of expatriates are also professionals, as well as the expatriates themselves are professionals. And so for their careers, the careers of the trailing spouses, especially if they're global, if their spouse is a global expatriate and moving from one country to another, what are the implications for that trailing spouse and their career? And I think those moves also put additional stress on all family members, not only the spouses, but the children as well. So it'd be interesting to track some of those implications for the family members.
Absolutely. Yes, I could not agree more with you. During a sabbatical we took, we could tell how our university age students or children who were already at the university had a much easier time following us when we taught in Germany and then in Poland than the younger ones that were in high school, and the embeddedness that they had within their own circles was posing more challenges than the other kids. But I'm digressing. Go ahead, Jan. Please tell us your own your thoughts, your reflections.
I had sort of a jokingly solution to that problem, Margaret. Once I met a self-initiated expatriate who went from country to country. He got a spouse in each country, and then he divorced and moved to the next country. So he didn't only shift host national but national country, but he also changed spouse. So there was no problem for him or for the spouse, I guess, because he didn't have to suffer all of these problems, at least, but maybe other problems. But now we're talking about the spouse problems of self-initiated expatriates.
Right. Sebastian, please. Yes.
I can piggyback on this. I think that's a really interesting question. So if you we tend to look at either the expats or the spouses. If you could actually look at the configuration of these 3 levels of embeddedness in the family unit, I would suspect, we didn't even think about this in the paper, right? But if I would suspect that those family or partners that have similar configurations are probably more likely to thrive internationally than, unless you want to divorce, Jan, right? But if there's a mismatch, you're probably less likely to, to be resilient in a global career. So I'm not making this easier empirically, but I think it would be really interesting to look at not only for the expat, but the family unit as such.
Right. I mean, there are so many ways in which we can slice this follow-up topic that can be very intriguing, very, again, thought-provoking. Thank you again. This is a wonderful presentation and a very interesting paper. And in fact, I need to start wrapping things up. We're almost out of time, especially because we do have a few announcements, and maybe we have time for one more question at the end or another reflection at the end. But let me just remind everyone that, or rather, not remind, but tell everyone that the next installment of our IHRM webinar series will include a perspective from the Global South, in which Michelle Hermans from Argentina, Anika Suhail from Tilburg in the Netherlands, and Samuel Airy from Sussex in the UK will be our presenters. They will be sharing their research with us this coming Thursday, September 25th. And Elaine Farndale is going to be our moderator for that webinar. More details will be provided in a few weeks. And for anyone who has registered for this webinar, we have your email address and we will be sending the invitation. And of course, we will be sending invitations to the next webinar in due time through the usual AIB, AOM, URAM, and all the other typical outlets that where we can find scholars interested in this topic. And obviously, if you have suggestions on topics or speakers, please send them to me or to any of my fellow organizers like Mila Lazarova, Elaine Farndale, Maral Murakbekova, and Marion Festing. We are looking forward to the next season of these IHRM webinars in the academic year 2025-2026. Also, please visit and subscribe to our YouTube channel. There is the place where we centralize, we post all the webinars for the benefit of our discipline, our students, our colleagues, our own research. So the links are being posted, and the webinar chat also has information about the upcoming CIHRS, Center for International HR Studies conference in 2026. There will be a conference in Cyprus. So please stay tuned for that. The call for papers will be coming pretty soon. Actually, thank you, Mila, for posting here on the webinar chat the information, May 21, 22nd of 2026 at the University of Cyprus. And well, I think there's the links for the paper, for the next panel that we will be having on this webinar series, the 17th Biennial IHRM Conference in Dubai, which has an extended deadline until the 31st of July. So if any of you is now working on a paper and it's almost ready to submit, you have a little bit more time to participate in this conference in October of this year. So that's essentially what I have in terms of announcements, and unless one of my fellow organizers has an additional comment or suggestion to add. Okay, by the way, here's the link on our screens. We have the special topic so that we can all save the date and get ready after a few months of break, our summer break in the Northern Hemisphere. So again, thank you so much, Jan, Margaret, Stefan, Sebastian. This has been a very inspiring, very thought-provoking webinar. And unless you or anyone else has a question or a comment, give a bit of time. All right, well, thank you. Thanks again. And I look forward to the next time that we meet in this International HR Management series. Have a wonderful rest of your day, your week, your summer or winter.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for attending.